Now it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's guest, Joseph Kopser, the Democratic nominee in the open contest to succeed Lamar Smith in Congressional District 21. This is Mr. Kopser's first run for office. He defeated 3 fellow Democrats in the March primary and now squares off in the general election 11 days from today. I can't decide if I'm sad or thrilled about the fact that it's 11 days away. Against a Republican Chip Roy and a Libertarian Lee Santos. The 21st has been represented by a Republican for 40 years, since Jimmy Carter was president. And in 2016, it went for Donald Trump by a slightly wider margin than the eventual president won statewide. But Mr. Kopser and the Democrats nationally have set their sights on flipping the seat from red to blue. A tech entrepreneur, Mr. Kopser was the co-founder and CEO of the transportation-centric software company RideScout, and most recently served as president of the advisory and analytics firm Grayline. He previously spent 20 years in the United States Army, earning the Bronze Star and retiring as lieutenant colonel. Born in Lexington, Kentucky, he has an undergraduate degree from West Point and a master's degree from Harvard University. Full disclosure, before he became a candidate for office, Mr. Kopser was a donor to the Texas Tribune. He's about to find out how little that gets him. Please join me in welcoming Joseph Kopser. Good to be with you.
Thanks for
being here. Enjoy it. Let me begin on a bit of a somber note. I suspect that most people in the room don't know this, but I've been looking at Twitter all morning. There's been an 11th pipe bomb found today addressed to Senator Cory Booker, discovered by authorities and all as well. This has been a difficult week, and people in your position, candidates and potentially elected officials, are asked and should be asked, what the hell is going on here and what the hell do we do about it? So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you what your reaction to this unsettling news of the week is, and what do we think about it? What do we do about it?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And these series are fabulous, that as well as the split decision and everything that you guys do here at the Tribune.
Happy to do it.
But let's talk very seriously about these pipe bombs. I mean, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I think it's important to point out, I've actually dealt in a career for 20 years. I've actually spent time in Iraq where pipe bombs, explosives were the everyday business among political groups that so hated each other that they were going after each other. Now, after my first trip in 2004, it was apparent within weeks of being on the ground that the war there was not about religious ideology. In fact, it wasn't even about ideology at all. It was about a power grab to fill that vacuum after the fall of Saddam Hussein. And what I see happening in the United States is sad. The fact that we are at a point where people, whether it's shootings on a baseball field or bombs or packages sent, or whether it's ricin sent to offices because someone doesn't like a particular vote in the Supreme Court. When we are at a point in society where the extremes of all angles, and I'm not saying all sides, I'm saying all angles of all of this, every extremist group believe that violence is a way through this. That's the saddest part. The best part, though, that we can do, as we've done in our nation's history, is overcome it with civility and discourse, and something that's been key to our campaign from day one, which is recognizing we have more in common than that which separates us.
Are you among the Democrats who blame the president for his comments over the last 2 years against the media and against so-called enemies? Because it is, if you look at the list of people, including up to and including Cory Booker today, the people who have been targeted in this have all been people who've been called out specifically, or institutions in the case of CNN, called out very specifically by the president. That's not to say the president's responsible, but some Democrats have said it is on the president for inciting people, and this individual or individuals, to do this. So are you there with those folks?
Not in the same way. I mean, I'm a student of history, so I recognize the fact that this is just the latest chapter in a lot of cases where people probably not in their right mind, who are resorting to these unbelievable terrorist-like tactics, are doing these things.
You think it's a coincidence that, I mean, now let me turn it around and be sympathetic to the position that the president has something to do with this. You think it's coincidental that it's these people? When's Elizabeth Warren getting hers? I mean, you kind of wonder, based on the list, how it can't be somehow a dotted line, if not a straight line.
No, if you're the chief of staff of the White House right now, you have to be in the Oval Office with the President of the United States going, here are the 12 people that you've been making fun of at your rallies. Here where 11 of the bombs have now showed up. Knock it off. mean, that's leadership.
So you think the president should knock it off? I mean, he was
he
was hate tweeting at CNN at 3 a.m.
This is the same person who, upon being a candidate, was standing on stage going, "You ought to punch that guy, and I'll pay for your legal fees." He's been doing it from day one, and that is conduct unbecoming, in my opinion, not the role and the position of commander-in-chief.
Let me ask you about this race. You have made your money. You have served your country. If I were you, I'd be drinking a beer and I'd be at a ball game every day, or I'd be at the Alamo Draft House every day. Right? I mean, I don't understand why you want to do this. So that sounds like fun to me. Being at the Alamo Draft House every day sounds like fun. Being in Congress does not sound like fun. Why are you doing it?
We still try, my wife and I try to get to Alamo Draft House as often as we can.
Good.
Sunday afternoon dates.
Peace.
Yes.
Yeah, but so seriously, I mean, you're under no obligation to do this.
Yeah, you use the example of the military in business, and you talked about service to country and the money that I made. I did not get into business to make money. I did not go into the military for a Bronze Star. I got into both of those organizations, got into both those worlds, because my very DNA since I was a kid, I mean, I write all about it on my website, my biography. I got into it because the teachers, the coaches, the platoon sergeants that I had in the military, all of them taught me that you measure success by how well we take care of the least among us. And there was one in particular, Mrs. Grievous, who I always talk about, my 6th grade teacher, who said, and this is a civil rights icon of the 50s and 60s. In the early 80s, she said, when you see a problem, fix it. And that's why I got into West Point to be an aerospace engineer. I wanted to continue this, be a part of the space program. I wanted in the Army to go where the trouble was, and that's why twice I volunteered for units that were going to Iraq. It's why the company I built here in Texas was about traffic and congestion. Who doesn't have a problem with traffic and congestion? And so the problem now is divisiveness in our politics. That's what I didn't know if I was going to run for city council or school board or I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that after the collapse of our politics in November
you wanted to run for something.
I had to return to public service, whatever it was.
Now, the decision to run for this seat is interesting. So neither you nor Mr. Roy, as I understand it, live in this district.
That's correct.
Right? I mean, you both have connections to the district. He has family who were in the district generation or two back. Your kids went to school in this district, right? Yeah. So it's, you can run for a district that you don't live in. That's the way it works. It happens to be an open seat, but you actually were running before it was an open seat. You were prepared, so interested in serving, or so crazy about the decision that you made here, that you were willing to run against an entrenched chairman, a much bigger uphill battle, conceivably, than running in an open seat. This was about Lamar Smith first before it was about Chip Roy.
Correct. Yeah. Really, it was less about Lamar Smith so much as it was that entire generation of elected officials that have been there for so long.
Right.
Lamar Smith has been there since I was in middle school.
Right.
I've since gone on to serve 4 years at West Point, 20 years in the Army, built a company. All that. In other words, I just think that whole generation has been so entrenched in their pitched battles that it's time for a new generation.
I'm going to ask you then, what is your number of capped terms that you're going to serve? Because anybody who starts complaining about people being in elected office too long, my first question back to them is, so then you're for term limits, and how many terms are you going to serve before you pledge to get out? So how many terms are you going to serve before you pledge to get out?
Whatever it takes to get the job done or get it fixed. And here's what I mean. So even though I was in the Army for 20 years, even in those 20 years, I bounced back and forth between the strategic and tactical side.
Right.
So I was part of the boots and muddy boots and training and bombs and guns part for the first 7 years. But then I took a break inside the Army and went for the strategic side. And I went to study at Harvard and then went back and taught government for 3 years. During that time, the war kicked off. So I immediately wanted to return to the Muddy Boots Army. Became a chief of staff of a battalion or squadron out in Fort Bliss, Texas, deployed with that unit. But then as soon as I got back, I had an opportunity to help with the Army modernization, to figure out how we build the Army after next. And so
there's different ways to serve.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, so but you understand that when you talk about people being in office entrenched or too long or whatever else, naturally the question is, how are you not going to become the thing you despised?
Oh, you just look at my background. I haven't done anything for more than 2 to 4 years in a row of the same kind of job.
So you're not prepared to say that you're for term limits, or not to say, as Congressman O'Rourke did when he was elected in 2012 against then Chairman Sylvester Reyes, he said, I'm only going to serve 4 terms.
Yeah, no.
So you're not prepared to say that you would. You did talk about Lamar Smith, though, in very specific terms when you were running against him during that brief period when he was still in the race. You talked about him as detached, that what happened in Washington was detached from the district, that he ended up serving White House interests and special interests rather than the interests of his constituents. And the second thing you called out was his chairmanship of the Science Committee, but his disbelief in science. That's a simplification, but basically that he was somebody who was responsible for the Committee on Science, but then didn't necessarily look to science as something he looked. So would you talk about those two parts? Why was he detached?
So I think,
and then talk about the science part.
Anybody that has been in Washington that long starts to become too comfortable because of gerrymandering. That's the real evil here. Gerrymandering is the underlying problem, because if he could just win his primary, he was pretty much set in the general.
Have the right letter next to your name.
Absolutely. And that is true for Democrats and Republicans in states that gerrymander to their favor. And it does democracy no good. And so once you get into a situation where you're pretty much guaranteed election or re-election, why do you feel then the need to have the town halls and to be present? And if there was one common critique I found in the 10 counties as I went around, is that they just weren't seeing them as much as they used to 20 or 30 years ago.
So you will have town halls in all 10 counties if you're elected to this seat, and you will agree to debate your major party opponent in every election if you get elected.
Absolutely. I love a good discussion.
Right.
I've invited my opponents, plural, to all of the town halls that we've done. I've always had an open door.
So this is how you avoid being detached.
Oh yeah.
Is you just stay connected back to the district. Yeah. So on the science piece, again, you mentioned you're an aerospace engineer. You were concerned that on climate, but on other issues, the chairman of the science committee didn't believe in science.
Well, in his 2 to 4 year chairmanship, he subpoenaed more scientists and subject matter experts and brought them in a way that was a very, I don't want to say combative, it's too harsh of a word, but was pushing back on them, creating doubt and sowing the seeds of doubt. He did that with more scientists in his 2 to 4 year term that he had there than any chairman in the 52-year history of the committee. Just look at the data. And so who he was trying to support, who he was trying to be a part of, I don't know. But ironically, after he announced his retirement, he's now had quite a few statements come out recently that talk about the acknowledgement after his trip to Greenland and that there is something going on. So yeah, it's time for a new generation.
Right. You're running on bio as much as any congressional candidate I can think of this cycle. You're not alone in running on bio, but you're running on bio, and you're running on the two parallel tracks of your bio, the military service and the business career. So let's take those one at a time, starting with business. Why does having been a tech entrepreneur make you qualified to serve in Congress, and how does it set you up for success? We'll do the military part second.
So there's two parts. There's not just the business angle, but what the actual business was. So on the business angle, it was every bit about how you build a team, see a problem, organize it, fight through the bureaucracy of city government, fight through the bureaucracy of state government. I mean, in the first year or so of our company, I couldn't even get a designation as a veteran-owned business from the VA and the Small Business Administration. The bureaucracy and the red tape.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. So I have been at the customer end, the receiving end of these programs at the federal level that I can now go do something about, and I have firsthand experience doing it.
Yep.
Secondly, on the nature of our company, technology and how we tried to use technology to make city infrastructure more connected, to allow people to find their rides, because ultimately we have too many people riding in cars by themselves. Not that they want to necessarily, because they're actually more productive if they're able to not be behind the wheel, whether it's sharing a ride, connected transportation, whether it be future autonomous.
Yeah.
The point is, these are all technologies that I've been a part of helping create that are going to be displacing jobs over the next 10, 20 years, and I have a firsthand understanding of its impact and how it works. For anybody watching, they can Google, or your listeners, I did a Science Channel video about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. It came out, and it highlighted my words saying that when a generation of leadership in Congress came in the 80s, like this group does, both parties, they haven't even used or had those technologies in their daily life, such to the point, it's been rumored or been told to me that there are still members of Congress that don't even have computers on their desk, some that don't even text.
Right.
How do you pass legislation about the net neutrality rules, about privacy, about the domains that are all dominated by our smartphones and technologies when you don't even understand.
Well, governments and bureaucracies tend to be behind the curve on technology.
Yeah.
This is not news to anybody, right? So if you go to Washington now, you find that the technology that is powering our government is probably 10 to 15 years behind what the rest of us have in our houses. You can't fix that overnight, and just electing a bunch of people with USB ports in the sides of their heads to Congress is not going to solve that problem.
Correct.
Right. But,
So
it would inform policy making and policy decisions that would have an effect going forward.
Oh, sure. But wouldn't it be great to have those same people that also understand technology with the USB port in the side of their head, who also know something about building a company, that also know something about leadership in large organizations? That is where the blend of, as you point out, the bio is not just one part of my life, but when you look at the entire narrative, it sets up very well for public service.
We have elected people to office, including the highest office in the country, who ran on their success in business. How'd that work out for us?
Oh, please make no parallels.
Well, I guess I'm just making the point that somebody who runs for office and says, "Elect me because I ran a successful business. I will do for the country what I did for my business." You know, that's a choose your adventure deal. I mean,
okay, so parallel it with the fact that for 14 months I was the chief of staff to an 1,100 person battalion in combat. I mean, that's slightly different than running a small business. So I'm not just running on the business experience alone.
Right. All right. So talk about this, the military stuff. I want to ask you for your specific perspective on why having been in the service for 20 years sets you up, again, qualifies you for office, sets you up for success. And then I want to back out of that secondarily and talk about a boom in people from the military branches all running for office this time.
So that's where I was going to start, where you ended last.
Sure.
So let me approach what I think was the first part of your question. Why military service, and how does that help in representation?
Right.
3 things I think military vets do really well in any context. First is we build teams, because we come from different parts of the country. Every zip code, every congressional district, every nook and cranny, every funny way of talking is in the military. So we learn to build teams to accomplish the mission. And that is the second part. By focusing on the mission and knowing what it takes, the tools, the teamwork, the people, we're standing in the hot sun, we're getting shot at, we want to get the mission done and get out. And that focus on mission is very different than other perhaps professions or sectors or way of life. Thirdly, whether you've been in combat, shot at, or only served in peacetime and had to leave your family for weeks on end, you learn to value what's really important. It's family, it's your own personal values, it's teamwork, and it's your friends around you. That's who you're fighting with and for. And so you learn to not sweat the small stuff. So whether the PowerPoint slide wasn't perfectly centered, whether or not that T-shirt came in with the right lettering and the right sizes, you don't end up yelling and screaming and hopping all over the place, because you know that there are much bigger issues in life that are out there. And vets have all 3 of those.
Well, something I was expecting you to say that occurs to me is that when you're in not the metaphorical trenches, but the literal trenches, the fact that somebody is a Republican or Democrat, is pro-choice or pro-life, is irrelevant if they have your back or you have theirs. Yeah. In, again, the most literal sense. So there's something almost depoliticizing about the experience of being in the service that maybe is helpful as we look ahead to a country that's becoming more tribal and more polarized than that was.
Yeah, well, that's the second part to your question that you had. And I couldn't agree more. When we would prepare for patrol, so I was the chief of staff, so my job was all the behind the scenes to make sure they had the beans, the bullets, the gas, and everything was repaired and ready to go. We had subject matter experts that built it. The question when they were leaving out the wire to go on their mission as they were leaving was, did they have the equipment? Did they have their vehicles running? It was not, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? It just never comes up in the context. In fact, you're often surprised if you do get on the subject of politics or the presidency, of where people sit on issues, because there are far more people from all backgrounds than the stereotypes of media would portray, as evidenced by the fact that right now there are more people that consider themselves Democrats running as combat veterans than there are Republicans.
Yeah, I want to understand that. So first of all, let's acknowledge the boom. All over the country this cycle, I believe it has been said, I haven't seen it fact-checked, but I believe it to be true, that not since World War II has there been such a boom in the number of service veterans all the branches of the service running for, not after Korea, not after Vietnam. So it's the Iraq and Afghanistan vets who are now running. And in Texas, we have MJ Hager, Gina Ortiz-Jones, Dan Crenshaw, Van Taylor, at least 5 that I can name off the top of my head, all of whom are running for Congress. But all over the country, whether it's Amy McGrath, Mikey Sherrill, Abby Spanberger, Democrats, there are an equivalent number of Republicans as well. But as you say, more Democrats than Republicans, but certainly more Democrats than historically have been the case. And that's the thing that really interests me. When veterans have run, they've overwhelmingly run as Republicans, and for some reason in this cycle, a lot of veterans are running as Democrats. Can you venture a guess as to why that is?
Well, first of all, labels are wearing thin, and I like reminding every audience.
Yeah, but you're not running as independents. I mean, come on.
But there's no structure for independence.
Is that why?
That's part of it.
But you could be the structure. I mean, when I Google your name on the internet, what comes up? The first thing that comes up is Joseph Kopser, independent as Texas. And my reaction to seeing that was, except for his party registration. No one forced you to register as a Democrat. No one forced you to run as a Democrat. If you're truly independent as Texas, then run as an independent. If the party structure or the party labels are wearing thin, any of these people could have run as independents.
Sure. And I'm sure there might be. But let me go back to your first point. Now I want to circle back to this because this is the essence, I think, of the issue. There has not been a time in our nation's history where we've had as few members of Congress with military experience.
It's 20% now, as it was 70% a generation ago, right?
It's terrible. And I think that has an impact. Why? And there's a correlation, maybe not causation, but correlation between that and the fact that we've been in war now for over 17 years with no end in sight.
You think if we have more people who have military experience in Congress, then they're going to be more reluctant to start wars?
Yes. We know the true cost of war. Our families have paid that cost. And then in addition to that, we don't feel this intimidation where you have the generals and the admirals all lined up at the hearings, and then the various parties want to posture and prove who's more patriotic by slapping them on the back and saying, good job, what do you need? The more important thing is, what do you not have to accomplish the strategy? And oh, by the way, what is the strategy? And because the administration has not had a clear strategy in both Democratic and Republican presidents since 2001, we're in the hot mess that we are.
So again, why are veterans choosing to run as I mean, I'm really interested in this. Why are veterans, in your mind, choosing to run now as opposed to the recent history of this country largely as Democrats?
I cannot speak to everyone else. I can only speak to myself. But the fact of the matter is, there's a couple of things that have happened inside the Republican Party that I don't recognize. I say in my biography, I grew up as a Ronald Reagan Republican as a kid. I was fiercely independent in my 20 years in the military. And so upon taking the decision to run, when I look at the parties, I think the Democratic Party today is doing a much better job of looking out for one another, which is an attribute I learned in the military. We leave no one behind, whether it's because they have pre-existing conditions, whether it's because they don't have the education they need, or because their zip code happens to be the wrong one and their life won't be the same as someone born in a different zip code. I think the Democrats are trying to get at that problem. They are by no means perfect. But the Republicans of today in Texas are the Republicans of Texas today that are censuring Joe Strauss for not being extreme enough or conservative enough or whatever it is. I mean, I thought Joe Strauss did a pretty damn good job in his years as Speaker here, especially with issues like pushing back on the extreme parts of his party, and then they go and censure him. So it's that kind of stuff that's happening, not just in Texas, but in other states. Kentucky's a great example with Amy McGrath. If you see where the Republican leadership has taken that state, pretty far to the right.
Amy McGrath is a combat veteran, running as a Democrat against Andy Barr for Congress. Andy Barr's the incumbent Republican. She's been one of the biggest fundraisers and one of the people who is sort of at the center of this whole veterans are running in this cycle deal, right? Everyone talks about her.
But again, back to the labels. You talk about infrastructure. The labels are a wearing thing. I'm in Fredericksburg, Texas, at the 4th of July float. Went and saw the Republican County, or the Gillespie County Republican float, shaking all their hands, introducing myself, and their eyes get as big as saucers. They probably had not seen a congressional Democratic candidate that far out in the hill country in a long time. And we talked about my military experience and business experience and raising 3 daughters into adulthood, and they can identify with that. And then one woman, as I was leaving, pulled me over and she said, "Why can't you be a Republican?" And the point is, whatever she thinks a Republican is today, business or military or a family man. I don't know her definition. I just know that those values are not Republican or Democrat. Those are American values.
I have the same question that she does, because I can read the political history of this district. As I said, 1978, the last time a Democrat served in this seat. You know who that was?
Yes.
Who was it?
Senator Kruger.
Bob Kruger. Bob Kruger was the last Democrat to hold his seat. 1978, was defeated. And that's the last time a Democrat's had this seat. This is a Republican district. And if you look at the last presidential election, Trump won the state by 9. He won the district by 10.
Yep.
This is a Republican district. Why didn't you run as a Republican? Couldn't you have run as a Republican? Wouldn't you have had a greater chance of winning this district? Forget the independent fan fiction, but could you not have run as a Republican?
Do you remember when candidate Donald Trump called John McCain a loser?
Oh, sure.
Do you remember when the Republicans pretty much went and went and hid?
Yeah.
I think that answers your question.
So you could not have, even though running as a Republican might have been a better path to success for you. I mean, you would have had to run. I mean, there were 17 people in the Republican primary during this last race. Come on in, the water's fine. You could have been the 18th, right? So even though you might have had a greater path to success, you could not have run as a Republican for that reason.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's not the only reason. That's just a great example.
Yeah.
But when you have a situation where you have millions of Americans that do not have health care, and then President Obama takes a Republican plan, Romney Care, built off the policies of Republican and conservative think tanks of the last 40 years, and then tries their best to create an individual mandate so that everyone is covered. It's the only way to bring costs down long term. And then the Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, who says, I'm going to make Obama a one-term president.
Yeah.
What is this party? I have no idea right now. And by the way, the moderate Republicans that are coming over supporting us with money and votes, they feel the same way.
You know, but I think about, you mentioned that you had been a Ronald Reagan Republican as a kid. You eventually gravitated to become a Democrat. But I also look at the positions that you hold as a candidate, and they do seem to me to be pretty straight down the middle Democratic positions. That's not to say that you're not a moderate or that you don't have appeal to Republicans, but your values politically seem to be more aligned with the Democratic Party. Yeah. And yet the values of the district seem to be more aligned historically with the Republican Party. If you look at polling in the district on issues, if you look at the voting history of the district, aren't you, good intentions and all that, running smack into the reality politically of this district, being more conservative than you? The voters are more aligned on issues with your opponent, Mr. Roy, than with you. And the numbers work against any Democrat running in this district this time.
If you only think the definitions as you describe them are consistent with the cable news or radio talk show that a lot of people listen to. Let me give you one example. We'll go back to the war. So when I'm in VFWs from Kerrville to Fredericksburg to here and every place in between, when we're all from Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm to now, all head nodding how ridiculous this war is. We're all head nodding together. We're in agreement, regardless of political party. Then when I take it a step further and we talk about ISIS and the growth of ISIS and remind them that it was fueled by Syrian farmers who left the eastern fields of Syria when the weather patterns changed such that their crops died, went looking for jobs in the cities like Aleppo and others, and the only people that were hiring were ISIS folks, which, by the way, it wasn't political ideology, it was a power grab. They were handing out rifles and cash. It's what's fueling it. So when I remind them that these changing weather patterns and this lack of an economy in Syria is helping to fuel ISIS, then we're suddenly in agreement. And so the stereotypes of why Democrats and Republicans supposedly aren't on the same page quickly melt away.
So if you get in front of people who have voted Republican traditionally, or who in polls respond to polling questions in a way that suggests that they are more aligned with the values of your opponent than with you, if you get in front of those people, you talk to them, you think you can persuade them.
A whole lot of them.
Right. So I looked at the campaign finance numbers that we published last night in this race. You only have about $93,000 left cash on hand. Your opponent has more money. You've consistently you outraised Lamar Smith when he was in this race. You've consistently outraised your opponent. I think you actually outraised in this last little stub finance period. You outraised Mr. Roy, but you've been spending at a much faster clip.
Yeah.
He has 2 or 3 times the amount of money in the bank now that you do. Do you have enough money left? Are you going to run out of gas at about exit 201 heading down to San Antonio before this race is over?
No, we just put another 6-digit buy. We're raising more money per day now than we have at any clip.
So you think you can get in front of those individual voters, make that case in the same way? You're not worried about your cash on hand being a disadvantage?
Oh, I'd always love more money for more advertising.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we're pulling in cash now at a point where we're going to be up on TV and stay on TV and on social media all the way through the end. Now, my opponent, you're right, he's got tons of cash on hand.
And he's got folks like the Club for Growth and other outside groups who are happy to put in. But
they didn't do squat. They put in like $60,000 and ran 2 terrible commercials. I think they're more focused on saving Uncle Ted, and we'll see how that goes. Remember, Club for Growth spent $8 million to try to stop Trump in the primary. So I think they see me and realize that I'm not quite as evil as they think. But back to your point, though, he does have a ton of cash on hand, and I think he and so many of the Republicans think they have this running away, that he's just saving cash for the next cycle.
Back to beautiful Ted.
Yes.
For a second. Politico published an interview earlier this week, in fact on Tuesday, the day that Mr. Roy was here, with your opponent, Mr. Roy. I thought a very long and very revealing interview. I mean, as journalism, I thought it was well done, and I thought Mr. Roy got an opportunity to talk at great length, and the headline was something to the effect of that he was the next Ted Cruz. And it said that even some people in the Republican leadership in Congress, I consider even the Republican leadership to be pretty conservative, although I know there's some dispute about that within the party. They said they were worried that he was to the right of the Freedom Caucus, that he would get in, he would be a member of the Freedom Caucus, but he would actually go farther than the Freedom Caucus. You sent out a campaign email, fundraising email, saying, hey everybody, the guy I'm running against is the next Ted Cruz, as if that's somehow a negative. Again, in this district, which is probably more for Ted Cruz than Beto, polling-wise, aren't you handing your opponent a gift by advertising to them? If you like, it's like Amazon. If you bought this, you might like to buy this. If you like Ted Cruz, you're going to like Chip Roy. Doesn't that help him more than you?
It would if it weren't true the dynamics that are actually occurring in this district. So for Texas 21...
But you agree that 21 is more of a Ted Cruz district than a Beto district by polling?
It's very close. You're going to be surprised.
You think
it's very
so?
Close.
Yeah.
And so let me get into the district again for viewers and people in the audience. It is Austin, South Austin. It's basically everything you can see out these windows all the way south to Alamo Heights in the northeast section of San Antonio.
And then it goes west. It looks like Massachusetts upside down,
yes,
right? Yeah.
And then it goes all the way out to Kerrville and Lakey, goes up to Fredericksburg, down along the 290 Wine Trail, through Johnson City, then it loops down around Dripping Springs in a horrible gerrymander carve-out, and then comes right back in along 290-71 back to here. There is a Republican, there are a whole number of moderate Republicans who may say in a poll that they like Cruz more than Beto, but when you go down to the next step and you say Kopser versus Roy, they're choosing Kopser because they do remember the government shutdown. They do know that Chip Roy has backers that were part of Empower Texas, that were part of the bathroom bill. They do know that that group, that type that is far to the right and proud to be far to the right of the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus are not what they're looking for in their representative. And then you blend that in with, oh, by the way, I'm talking about building bridges and allowing moderates and independents to come over to be able to help be a part of this new coalition, knowing that on my far left, there are some people that are not going to vote for me because I'm not pure enough for them because of my stances that drive them crazy.
So let's come to the dynamics of the Democratic Party as it relates to some of the things you just talked about. So you're running as a Democrat. Yes. You've made the decision to run as a Democrat, not as an independent, not as a Republican. You've explained why. When you run as a Democrat, you own the Democratic brand. Now, the Democratic brand has aspects to it in the same way that the Republican brand has aspects to it. Not every Republican is carved out the same way. You point out that some people find Joe Strauss to be not sufficiently conservative. Joe Strauss has been a Republican for a lot longer than some of the people criticizing him for not being Republican enough. Yep. On the Democratic side, there's a version of that going on. Any Democrat running these days for Congress or any other office is going to be saddled with an association with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and of late Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Bernie Sanders, Do you embrace the Democratic brand as it relates to those National Democrats, or do you run from that association?
Oh,
do you run from it, run from the National Party, or embrace it?
Run from it, by your question, the way you structure it. Yeah.
What's wrong with the National Party?
Well, it's not so much that there's something wrong with the National Party as there is something wrong with the Republican National Party, which is they've been there for so long. They're so entrenched with their wins and loss records that if we take a blend of what they're talking about, there is common ground to fix some problems. Opioid crisis is the best example. It just passed the Senate the other day, I think, by a vote of 98-1.
President signed the bill, I think, right? Yeah.
And if we can focus on what it is that we can actually fix, I'm happy. But here's one example. Here's what I think you're digging at. There's a lot in the far left that say that universal education should include a 4-year free degree from public universities.
I think Bernie Sanders campaigned, and not only Bernie Sanders campaigned on free college.
And I so push back on that for a couple of reasons. Number one is the simple fact that we want to make sure that we have a trained and ready workforce for the 21st century. I wrote a book on it. I've been involved in it. I've been a part of it with Bunker Labs here in Texas to be able to help veterans be a part of this new workforce. Volunteering with them. I'm working girls STEM education with Girls Start and other programs. We need to be ready for the workforce of the 21st century, not just necessarily thinking that the answer is a 4-year degree. What we need is more job training, apprenticeship programs, workforce education. And so what I want to see, if we're going to commit funds and money, I want to partner first with business and say, what do you need? That's where I want to see the problem addressed.
Yeah, but you're talking about issues. They're not talking about issues when they associate you with
Imagine
Nancy
that.
Well, but they're not talking. Well, hold on. Well, you guys are guilty of that too, to some degree.
Right.
The fact is that when they try to associate you with Nancy Pelosi or with Chuck Schumer, they're not talking about issues necessarily. They're just saying basically, again, it's like Amazon. If you like Nancy Pelosi and you buy Joseph Kopser, basically you're getting a product that is very similar in attributes. Where are the differences politically, not on issues, but politically, between you and the crew running the National Democratic Party?
Well, frankly, I don't read enough of their stuff. I've never actually even read the Democratic platform. I know that they had a new plan that they've been having coming out, branding that they have of work together. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a big launch last year.
Run together.
Right. I don't read them. I don't read them. What I do is I read the reports of federal policy that San Antonio is asking for from the federal government.
So you're prepared to go into Congress and commit to people in your district, even though I'm a Democrat, I'm going to vote with the district regardless of party. So if the party tells me I need to vote a certain way on an issue, nope, I'm voting the way that works for the district, and that may be completely opposite of what Nancy Pelosi or whoever the leaders in Congress are.
Facts and figures and the will of the people in the district will determine where I vote.
Will you support, I mean, we've asked you this before, and I believe I know the answer, but leadership race, because we have to ask this of every candidate. I asked Mr. Roy, actually, about his choice for Speaker should the Republicans retain, and he said he's endorsed Jim Jordan.
Yeah, and then waffled a little on why not Ryan if Ryan stays in.
Well, I mean, when I asked candidates in the Republican Party in Texas this cycle, who is your candidate for Speaker of the Texas House, they're able to hedge and say, well, tell me who's in the race before I tell you. And I keep hearing that also from some Democrats. But you're not going to waffle, are you? You're going to give me a straight answer.
Not voting for Nancy Pelosi. Not
under any circumstances.
Nope. And this is kind of cool, too. I found out that there's this secret vote that they do apparently beforehand, and then there's a public vote so that you can vote one way in the secret vote and then another way in the... No. We just need a whole new generation.
It doesn't make a difference who she's running against.
Nope.
You'll vote for somebody else.
What I did to make it even more clear was sign a pledge called Breaking the Gridlock from an organization called No Labels, which I encourage folks to check out. And there's a whole litany of reforms that need to be made by the Speaker in terms of how bills are moved through committee, what allows them to come out, all this behind the scenes stuff that nobody follows.
So there's nobody who could run against Nancy Pelosi that would cause you to to vote for Pelosi? Nobody? If A-Rod ran against Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, you would support A-Rod?
I won't deal in the crazy hypotheticals. I'm just being very clear that we need a whole new generation.
Right. But you don't have a particular person you're looking to in mind?
No, not yet.
Because there have been a bunch of names, as you know, mentioned. What do you do about Donald Trump? The conundrum for a lot of people in your party has been when the president tweets or the president says something out there, they feel like they need to respond to everything, or they feel like they need to respond in kind. The Michael Avenatti phenomenon, which I suspect we're all going to be looking back on with amusement in about 5 minutes, is an embodiment of the idea that you have to out-Trump Trump, that you can't possibly, or this thing that Eric Holder articulated that then was criticized, that when they go low, you go lower, right?
Kick 'em.
Right, kick them. What should you all do about the president? How do you respond to him?
Here's how I respond to him, which is to acknowledge the obvious. So as a kid, I read The Art of the Deal. Like, I thought that was cool. The whole Gordon Gekko, greed is good. Like, you know, you're so warped at that age trying to figure out what right looks like. I read the book. Yeah. Later turns out that book, you know, the ghostwriter said unbelievably inaccurate. But I read the book. Then when The Apprentice came out, I was watching every one of the first couple of seasons. I thought that that was pretty cool. In fact, season 2 winner was an Army, West Point grad. So I took my students to actually go meet him to talk about the winner, to talk about leadership and strategy. So for a very long time, I thought that he was who he said he was, until the whole birther movement. And then I realized, wait a minute. And then after I got into the birther movement and realized what he was trying to do to create doubt and create divide in the country, then I got into his actual biography and realized that all those properties in New Jersey and Atlantic City, not only many of them went bankrupt, but he also stiffed a lot of his contractors and workers, and realized that what we saw was a Hollywood version of the reality of who he was. So when he started running, you maybe have stories, or I even wrote op-eds that I think one of them even made it into the Texas Tribune that said, this guy is not what he says he is. So let's talk about what he's trying to do. And the voters that put him in want to talk about jobs in the future. So when people feel like they're disconnected from the economy, how do you reassure them that the answer is education and opportunity, not building a wall? How do you make sure that for the most popular sign in the window of any business in Texas 21 is a faded help wanted sign because the labor shortage that we have in this district? How do we tell those shop owners that the problem is not too many immigrants coming over, but not enough immigrants that are coming here, and a system that is so backlogged we can't get the trained and ready workforce we need, both born here and born outside the country.
You've given a paragraph-like nuanced and sophisticated response when I was actually looking for blood to be dripping from your fangs. I'm not actually looking for substance, Mr. Kopser.
This is the Texas Tribune, sir.
Yeah, but I'm asking as a practical matter, not what is the intellectual response to Trumpism, it's what is the visceral response to Trump. I'm saying when he tweets about something, or he says something really wild and exaggerated and controversial, I'm thinking about the journalism response to this. So the president starts attacking the media 16, 18 months ago, and Marty Barron, the editor of the Washington Post, says, with regard to how the media should respond to its part of this, our job is not to go to war with the president, our job is to go to work. Our job is not to respond in kind or necessarily to respond at all. Our job is to continue to do really great journalism. Great journalism is the best revenge, in essence, is the thought there. So I'm kind of asking you the political version of this. If you're a Democrat in Congress, or you're a Democrat running for office, and the president is hate tweeting at people in the middle of the night, calling Maxine Waters low IQ, and this, that, and the other, and saying these wild things as he has been known to say, what should Democrats' response to that be? Or should there be no response to that?
My wife and I raised our 3 daughters, and I had a saying with all 3 of them, said from the time they were toddlers until today: be happy, do the right thing, and try to have a good thing to say. Try being the key word. That's how you respond to this president. Now, there will be people who will be those ardent champions who will take every tweet and will attack every tweet. But while that is happening, I am going to be focused on what we can fix, because if a person, and I've stopped reading his tweets, I will see them occasionally when they pop up.
I signed up for alerts after a while, not necessarily the best idea, but you at least get to see them. You don't care. You don't care what he does.
No, I care. He's the president of the United States. I have to know what he's doing.
But I guess the point is, Mr. Kopser, it's the response to Trump should not be to do Trump on steroids on the Democratic side. It should be to be the un-Trump or the anti-Trump. In terms of affect.
Treat people with dignity and respect. Focus on the problem in front of you. Actually do and fix the things. Because he builds on this energy. He loves the attention. And the talk show radio hosts, which I listen to on all sides, they're well, not to contrast them with you, but they're for-profit entities. They want more airtime. They want more commercials. They want more. And one of the ways to do it is to create this division.
And actually, he's right about that. When he says, you know, the media love me because their ratings have never been higher, there is actually a version of that that's true. Are you a vote for impeachment?
So yes, here's.
Yes, you are a vote.
Let me clarify, because my opponent loves to have fun with this one. The question was asked many times, where are you on impeachment? And I said very clearly, look, the guy's doing enough on his own digging, so I say just hand him a shovel and just let him keep digging. And I said that if it ever comes up, I'll be there, no problem. And what I mean by that is, let's see what's in the Mueller report. If it's possible that this has been an amazing stream of coincidences and all the indictments that he has nothing to do with it, the Mueller report, I'm sure, will show that, and then we can move on. But he's hiding something in his taxes. That's what I've wanted to see from the very beginning. What's in the guy's taxes? And what?
In fact, Mr. Roy said in the interview with Tim Alberta from Politico this week that he didn't necessarily believe that it was a good idea to require presidents to release their tax returns.
That's why we designed the emoluments clause. It's ironic that people claim to want to adhere to the framers and the interpretation.
So you believe that whatever happens with the Mueller investigation, Congress should get access, as it has access statutorily. If it wanted to get the president's tax returns, it could. You think Congress should?
Oh, I think we should.
Right, but so to clarify an impeachment before we move on, you are potentially a vote. You're not turned off by. You're not committing not to vote for impeachment, but you want to see what.
Oh yeah.
You want to see what it is.
Oh, I want to see the Mueller report.
I asked Mr. Roy about 5 things. I want to kind of do game show speed round here on this before we go to the audience. I want to ask you the same 5 things I asked him about. Okay. On health care, his complaint about the repeal of the Affordable Care Act attempted by Congress last year was that it didn't go far enough. He was a no vote on the repeal and the repeal plan that the Congress had put in front, that Trump had put in front, only because he thought it actually didn't do enough to undo the Affordable Care Act. If there's an attempt to undo the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare in Congress, you are a no vote.
I want to improve Obamacare. We have to fix the existing system that we have.
So mend it.
Amend it, yes.
Not end it.
Correct.
Right. What about Medicare for all? That's become a Democratic or progressive trope during the campaign.
As I say on my website, Medicare for all does not have the votes now. What I want to see is a system in which everyone is covered better than we are today. My friends on the right who say, how are you going to pay for it? I remind them we already have health care for all. It's the least efficient way to do it because care is given to millions in the emergency room.
Let me bust your chops for a
Please.
second and say that when I ask you if you're for Medicare for all and you tell me it doesn't have the votes, you haven't answered my question. I don't care whether it has the votes. Are you for it?
I'm for health care for all. See, this is what drives me.
Are you for Medicare for all? It's a very specific question.
If Medicare for all can get us there, fine. If we call it universal health care for all, fine. If it's lowering the Medicare age of eligibility, changing the standard for eligibility for Medicaid, making it so that employers have even better incentive to provide, I want to get it to where we close the gap and everyone's covered. But healthcare in the U.S. today is like Frankenstein's monster. It's so complicated. Just get everybody covered, and then costs will start to come down because of pre-existing conditions is the part that very few people want to talk about. And I'd love to talk about it because it's what makes healthcare so hard, because we have in this district over 300,000 people with pre-existing conditions, and there is no financial model that makes it smart for a for-profit company to do it, which is why the system is broken.
Now, Mr. Roy said the other day he supports people having access to health care if they have pre-existing conditions, but he doesn't. But his answer was a little bit more complicated than that because he thought that we needed to basically blow up this. He'll hate my paraphrasing it this way, but basically blow up the system and return control back to individuals and create in the wreckage of Obamacare a system in which this whole question of getting access to coverage for pre-existing conditions is a non-issue. He's not opposed to people having access to pre-existing conditions coverage in theory, but his route there is a different route.
So he's an in theory guy. I'm a in reality guy. In reality, for people that have a pre-existing condition,
well, Mr. Roy theoretically has one, although there was some question about whether being in remission after having cancer a certain number of years takes you out of that realm. That's what
I hope his next employer doesn't say that it's 5 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I hope for his sake that he can keep coverage and they don't view that as a pre-existing condition, cancer, that would not allow him to be covered. I want coverage for all because there is no incentive for a private company to pick up a person with pre-existing conditions And that's where the problem is.
This is already the worst speed round of all time.
All right, well, because it's the hardest subject.
I get it. It's my own fault. We're going to be at about a $22 billion deficit by the close of this year, $1 billion in deficit this year alone. Do you believe the tax cuts are the reason that the deficit has ballooned? Do you believe that too much spending, as Mr. Roy says, is the reason that the deficits have ballooned? Do you blame the Obama administration? Because this problem was not created over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yes, yes, and yes. And so here's what's going on.
You think it was both spending and the tax cuts?
Absolutely. So look at the tax cuts. The business community, of which I was proud to be a part of and still consider myself to this day, we ask for a corporate tax rate of about 25%. Is in the high 30s, bring it down to 25. But for either political reasons or the president wanting to prove that he's bigger, badder, stronger, whatever, took it all the way down to 21, adding even more debt, taking even less revenue out of the budget, meaning that this year, as Congress CBO confirmed, we're going to be running a higher debt this year than they anticipated. But more importantly, those gains are going to the wealthiest people and companies that were already doing pretty good. And the fact that they sold it as a middle-class tax cut, even they recognize a year later, as they're having to go back now and try to make them permanent, that what they sold last year was really more for the donor class than it was the working middle class. And that kind of charade drives me crazy. And to have Republicans add $1.5 trillion to the deficit proves that labels are wearing thin.
Given how they complained during the last administration about deficits. So you would be a vote to undo the tax cuts?
To amend them. I want to preserve them for working middle class. Absolutely.
But you want to see taxes raised on business and on wealthy individuals?
Let's go back to 25%.
The fact is you'd be voting for a tax cut on yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I want to go back to 25%, which is where the corporate tax levels were asked for by the business community. That's a start. But there's a lot more, which is, of course, expanding revenue by building the economy bigger.
Is the Migrant Caravan, the so-called Migrant Caravan, which we've begun to hear about, a little bit like a yellow Volkswagen? You don't see one, then you see one every day. Now we can't escape mention of the Migrant Caravan. We weren't talking about it until it became the last inning of the game, election-wise. Is it a legitimate political issue and a legitimate national security issue or not?
Definitely a legitimate immigration reform and border security issue.
Yeah.
National security, no.
Is it not a threat?
Our broken immigration system is a threat because what it's making.
Is the caravan a threat specifically?
No, no. But I will say this, that by understanding more about how we can work with our Central American and Mexican government partners to be able to fix this problem. See, it comes down to simple issue. We are a great and good people. If a baby showed up at our doorstep, we would take that baby in. The very next day, another baby comes, we would take that baby in. By the third baby, somebody's going to wake up and say, where are these babies coming from? And what do we do to solve the problem where it exists? So I've advocated for the fact that just after World War II, we helped rebuild Japan and Europe. After this drug war that's gone on for 40 plus years, we have a responsibility, because it's our cash going down to Central America that's causing this corruption. Right. We have a responsibility to be able to see what we can do to fix this flow. We did with Mexico. It's called NAFTA.
Do you have any problem with the president ordering General Mattis to send 800 troops down to the border?
Yes.
You do have a problem with that?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we have boots on the ground?
Because from what I've read, and again, I'm only getting my information from open source, not classified material, but everything that I've read, that this is not a threat to national security. There's a difference between Title 10 responsibility and Title 32, and anybody that served in the military understands the difference. We don't want our troops being committed to border security, because that is, under the current law, not what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, in fact, the people being sent down, if I understand it, don't have the authority to apprehend, right? The people, it's a totally different deal. Yeah. Why aren't we responding more forcefully to Saudi Arabia over, the story changes every day, but over what we now know and what they now acknowledge was the murder of an American resident, Jamal Khashoggi? Yeah. Should we be responding more? What would Congressman Kopser be advocating for right now if that were if you were
short term and long term? Yeah. In the long term, I want to remind everyone that we're beholden to the countries in the Middle East because of the world economy's addiction to oil. Full stop. Yeah. That's why we're making these bad decisions. Secondly, in the short term, we have all four tools: diplomatic, intelligence, military, and economic sanctions, by which to move all those levers to make our partners either respond to situations like this, or long-term provide disincentive for them to do this. But I will tell you, upon learning the news, I, as a member of Congress, probably would not have led by saying, we're going to keep the $110 billion weapons deal in place. That probably would not have been my first move.
You're prioritizing the economics over the commitment to protecting everybody who lives in this country, right? I mean, that seems to me to be the choice being put before us.
Yeah, I want to use all four.
You'd walk away from any kind of an arms deal in a case like this if you were in Congress.
I would want to see again.
I mean, if
all
it's
the
actually, we don't
details.
even really know if it's an arms. There's been some question as to whether this stated deal is actually a deal. Do we even have a deal?
Yeah,
Right.
I'm not a big fan of
Right. Okay.
what's going on in the Middle East with our addiction to oil.
Is the Mueller investigation legitimate? I think we've kind of dealt with this. It is a legitimate investigation.
Yeah.
And so you would be for allowing Mueller to continue doing his work. You
Absolutely.
would be a vote against allowing the president to curtail the investigation, end the investigation, fire Rod Rosenstein. I mean, we may get a new attorney general after the election, but you're down that path.
Yep.
Last thing, before we take a question or two here, it's Unity in the Country Week. It's Come Together Week.
Really?
Say something nice about your opponent.
Oh, I think Chip Roy, who is someone I've met when I was in business, is a good and decent person. He loves his family. He loves his kids. He loves Texas sports. I think he's the kind of guy
He's a little bit too much in love with University of Virginia sports for my taste, honestly. But
it happens. He is the kind of person that I would want to have a beer with, and he's the kind of person who, when I'm making tough decisions as a member of Congress, I would want to call to get other views. It's one of my favorite things in business and the military. I always surrounded myself with smart people who thought differently than me, and I could easily see myself picking up the phone and calling them.
okay, let's take two questions before we break. I can almost tell you Mr. Beulah's question I can almost do it in his voice. Climate is bad, Mr. Beulah.
I'm going to trick you a little bit on climate.
All right, go ahead.
Of course, environmental issues are top concern and hardly talked about. Natural disasters last year, $306 billion. During 2017, we had $16 billion emergencies across this country. And Texas companies are some of the biggest offenders when it comes to pollution. In 938 instances, Texas companies released pollution that exceeded federal levels. And over a 21-month period, 8,100 times violations of Clean Water, Clean Air Act. 12% of those came from Texas.
So question.
My question is, Texans want to breathe clean air and have lower health care costs. What can the Congress do to help that happen?
And what can you as an individual member of Congress do to address this issue?
First of all, is to remind everyone that the state of Texas was a leader in energy for the last 100 years with oil and gas. And now we can blend that with a portfolio of renewables to be able to allow Texas to remain being a leader for the next 100 years. But inside of all that, I want to go back to your first point. The silver lining that not enough people are talking about in finding a solution between different parties and bringing business to the table to reform environmental and climate issues is the insurance industry. They're the same group that during the DUI and drunk driving groups over the last 40 years in this country finally came to the table and said, time out. We do have a problem. Here are the real numbers. Here's the real cost to our country. And when they got to the table, heads changed, heads turned, and we had real change. So I welcome the business community back to the table on this issue.
Good. Mr. Armstrong.
Just quickly, you mentioned that the dynamics in the race. Bottom line.
Bottom line, we early heard a lot about a blue wave, and that's kind of calmed down. Republicans now have some momentum. What do you see in your race and in your district as it relates to where is the momentum as it relates between the two candidates and as well as Democrat and Republican, and is it differing in the metropolitan part of your district in Travis and Bexar counties with the rural area?
Well, we were talking about this actually before. Travis early vote numbers are near presidential levels, but Bexar County is actually less of a presidential level turnout compared to some of the other urban counties. So what are you seeing there?
So I'm going to speak at a higher level without getting too deep into the numbers, because I know Matt Makoviak is watching, and I don't want to tip my hand to what we're seeing in our numbers.
You say his name, it's like Beetlejuice. He appears.
Oh, yes.
Actually.
Oh, yes. Oh, I know he's watching. But here's the thing. What we knew to win this race is that we'd have to have Democrats come out in presidential year numbers. Check, that's happening. Because in Bexar County, I'm only northeast Bexar County, Alamo Heights, Terrell Hills, Castle Hills, that area, around Fort Sam Houston, up 281.
Right, Joe Strauss is your constituent.
He is. Oh, I've said,
or would be, right, that's true. Yeah.
I've said that, and if Speaker Strauss or his friends are listening, I don't know where the camera is, but I sure would love to partner with him on real opportunities going forward in the state. Because I think the extremes are taking everything in a direction that we don't want to do. But to your last point, we needed independents to show up at near presidential year numbers, and we need about 3/4 of them. And among Republicans, I need them to show up in about midterm year numbers. Now, they are somewhere between midterm and presidential year numbers, but I only need a couple, like 10, 20% of them. In order to win. And the good news is, it is women between the ages of 50 and 75 that when they hear our message and they see our commercials talking about public service, bringing calm out of the chaos, a business sense in what this state needs,
right,
that message is working.
11 days left. It's just after 9, so we're going to wrap it up there. Good luck to you on the campaign trail.
Thank you
for making
Thanks
time
for having
us.
me.
Joseph Kopser, good. Thank you. Good. All right.